25 years of the world's first supersonic passenger plane. Tonight, Concorde comes home to Bristol. Good evening and welcome to News West. Tonight we're coming live from Filton, the home of Concorde. It was from here that she flew for the first time in Britain a quarter of a century ago. In a few minutes' time, she'll be back to join in the celebrations.
Well, later in the programme, we'll be talking to the people who made her, the people who fly her, and a few of those fulfilling their dream to travel on board her.
Well, we understand Concorde will be landing here at Filton very shortly. And no one knows better what it's like to fly Concorde than the man who made that first flight from Filton 25 years ago. Brian Trubshaw was the plane's test pilot and was at the controls of 002 as it landed at Fairford in Gloucestershire. Well, now, Brian, with us here, hopefully to see her coming down the flight path very shortly. You had some tricky moments, though, on that first flight, didn't you?
Yes, we did, because we lost the two radio altimeters, which give you very accurate height information, which the pilot needs in the last part of the landing like this. Because when the main wheels touch, the pilot's eyes are 40 feet off the ground. So the engineer, in the case of British Airways, will be calling him the accurate height information now, and as he comes on down through about 50 feet, he comes to 15 feet. At that point you shut the throttles and bingo, there you are, a beautiful touchdown.
It looks very good, I must say.
Very good landing.
Wonderful snoop nose so that he can at least see something.
Oh, he can see very well indeed. And now he's using the reverse thrust to help the braking. At 60 knots it'll be cancelled and you'll hear the noise reduce when it is cancelled, and then the aircraft will taxi in.
And a fine sight she is against the Bristol sky there over the runway. Well, thank you very much indeed, Brian. We're going to let her taxi around the airfield now, and we'll be talking to some of the passengers a little later on. Now to Annie.
Well, on board today's very special flight are some very special people. Many of them worked on Concorde, and for them today's special Concorde flight into Filton is a dream come true.
Well, today's the day. Well, a dream come true, really, because when we worked there, we had these sort of draws. We all put our names in hats for the test flights, and I was never lucky, so now I am lucky today. Do you remember we used to dive out after our evening meal
to see
in the evening and go down?
Yes.
In the 50s and 60s, when they worked on the Brabazon and Britannia programmes, the technology was very different. It's all changed now, but their enthusiasm for all things aeronautical remains the same. At 1 o'clock, they met up with the other 98 passengers for today's flight. The air of expectation was rising.
Getting very excited indeed. It's just one of the occasions which we've been looking forward to when we booked this up months and months ago. I've been ticking the calendar off every week to say, well, only one more week to go. And when it is one more week, 5 days to go.
From Filton, coaches ferried the guests to Heathrow, where Concorde awaited them. At £200 a ticket, this indeed was to be the flight of a lifetime.
Good morning, sir. Hello. Thank you. I enjoy working with the Concorde. It's great fun. You meet all different types of passengers. You meet the film stars, the heads of industries. You meet a real good mixture on the Concorde. You can always tell the first-time flyer on Concorde. They come up to the desk, they're excited, they're looking around all the time. They want to know everything. It's always my dream to go on Concorde as well. I went in it about a year ago. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Everything I dreamed it would be.
I come over here in the mornings to pick the Concorde up for the 10:30 flight. We work on all types of aircraft, but we're all excited when we actually work on Concorde. It's very nice in the summer, but obviously in the winter, with weather like this and the snow and the ice is very difficult. And you just got to be more careful. I'd like to sit in the captain's seat and fly it. I just think it'd be fantastic.
One man with extraordinary foresight was responsible for putting Filton on the aviation map. Sir George White was the first to bring electric trams to Bristol at the end of the last century. When the first aircraft were built, he saw earlier than almost anyone else how important they would become. Within just 6 years of the Wright brothers' first flight, the visionary Sir George White was testing his box kite plane on Bristol's Durham Downs.
He was an extraordinary man. He was a self-made man, the son of a painter and decorator and of a lady's maid. And he succeeded during his lifetime in making a very considerable fortune.
His tramway sheds at Filton became an aircraft factory, converted at huge expense.
It simply staggered the aeronautical correspondents of the magazines at the time because it was a purpose-built factory. They'd never seen such a thing. It had flat floors, it had dust-free rooms, it had rows of aero engines which just simply couldn't be seen anywhere else. And certainly by the end of 1911, it was the biggest aircraft factory in the world.
At the time of the First World War, it took 25 hours to shape a propeller. Workers earned £1 an hour for a 60-hour week. As the factory prospered, the planes got bigger. This 1918 bomber had such an enormous wingspan, it had to be pulled out sideways. New frontiers were being explored all the time. After the war, the Pullman aircraft was designed to give air passengers express train-like comfort at 130 miles an hour. Although Sir George had died in 1916, his influence lived on. Bristol Cars, also built at Filton, combined luxury travel with racing car performance. And with a long track record of successes in aerospace, perhaps even the far-sighted Sir George would be surprised by what's come out of his old tram sheds since.
The most famous plane ever to come out of Filton is, of course, Concorde, which I can hear now. And the chance to take the controls of what some have called the most beautiful aircraft in the world is something every pilot wants.
The first time I flew the aeroplane, I walked round the hangar and there was this gleaming white Concorde. And I thought, you know, never, I'm not going to be able to fly that. But an hour later, there we were at the end of the runway and taking off. And it's a beautiful aeroplane to fly. It's one of the first genuine pieces of 21st century technology, because if you think of most machines, even the ones you've got now will be obsolete at the turn of the century. But Concorde will still be 20 or 25 years ahead of the nearest opposition at the turn of the century. And I really do think it's a marvellous piece of British technology, British and French.
Well, of course, Concorde had a very smooth landing just a few moments ago here at Filton, but things haven't always been so easy for her. At one point, it seemed she had no future as a commercial airliner. The Concorde project was vastly over budget, and many saw her as little more than an expensive white elephant.
November the 29th, 1962 heralded the age of supersonic travel. Britain and France signed an agreement to develop and build Concorde. But by 1974, the Labour cabinet were talking about scrapping her. 25,000 jobs in Bristol were at stake.
If you start a project like this, you finish it, which was quite logical. And you see, this principle of cancelling projects, I looked it up when I got in 74. In the previous 10 years, an engine, an airframe or a missile had been cancelled every 6 weeks. It was unbelievable. Now, whether Concorde was the best aircraft to start is arguable. I think it might have been better if we'd gone into Airbuses. But having started it, there were 250,000 people, and jobs involved in it, in Toulouse and in Bristol and elsewhere, and in Scotland where the Rolls-Royce engines were made. So I was passionately committed to keep it going.
So Concorde was saved, only to face new problems. In the 1970s at Filton, there was constant industrial unrest.
The policy of the unions at Filton at that time was to do the maximum amount of embarrassment to the company with a minimum loss to our members. And the minimum loss to our members meant that production continued and was always made up every time we had a stoppage and went back again.
Despite the rows, Concorde's designers battled on, determined to get the world's first supersonic plane into the air. Building and flying Concorde was one thing. Selling her was quite another. In 1969, 16 airlines expressed an interest. In the end, only 2, Air France and British Airways, operated them. Now, of the 23 that were built, only 13 are still flying.
Well, here at Filton, we're not only celebrating Concorde's anniversary, we're also celebrating some of the many other things to have been made on this historic site. Here are a few of the famous Bristol cars, and lining up behind us symbols of Filton's achievements in aircraft making, like the marvellous Blenheim. 6,000 were built, but this is the only one still flying. And earlier today, she flew in here. She came in from Duxford near Cambridge to land here at Filton. But what's happening here is about a lot more than just a chance to see Bristol's achievements on display.
Yes, tonight's also about raising money. Very shortly, 400 people will be in this hangar. Their aim is to start the ball rolling for a fund for a museum for everything that's ever been made at Filton. In its heyday, this hangar was a bustling assembly hall. More than 30,000 workers built planes, engines, buses and the famous Bristol car. Today, the collection that was once the pride of Bristol is now a set of museum pieces without a home. Most of these planes have been kept in storage in Weston-super-Mare for years, but now Bristol wants them back.
The reward for the politicians who fought so hard to get Concorde built was jobs for their constituents. The Concorde project employed thousands of people in North Bristol. One family who still live within yards of the Filton site claimed to have more than 200 years of collective service.
Concorde was a big project for the Loveridge family. Father Bill tested the rivets, son Roger helped make the panels, and brother Bob still makes spares for the Rolls-Royce engine.
Well, I was mostly involved with testing fasteners, otherwise rivets, nuts and bolts, and nut plates, as they call them. Most of the body, the cabin and the droop nose, I think most of that was made at Filton at one time.
Started my apprenticeship in the machine shop. A lot of the work in the machine shop was on the Concorde. All machine components, brackets, large frames, machining segments, parts of the undercarriage, parts of the wing sections. We do a lot of Airbus work now, very much into Airbus, which is, again, a really very successful project and a very, very good plane.
But they're still manufacturing parts for 593, just spares. Obviously there's only spares because as long as Concorde flies they need spares for the engines, so they've still got to manufacture the engines. So part of us working on was combustion chamber.
But a lack of jobs means the next Loveridge generation won't be working at Filton. Supersonic memories will for now have to remain firmly fixed in the past. Nigel Gainsborough, BBC News West.
Well, Concorde has now finished taxiing here at Filton, and today's passengers are beginning to disembark. Mark Ashton is with them.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And the sound in the background is the very fine Royal Gloucester Band of the Hussars. And with me now is Esme and Mike Carfield, who we spoke to earlier. Esme, how was the flight?
Absolute magic. The acceleration was fabulous. We toasted our retirement at 400 miles an hour.
And,
what more can I say?
Was that £400 well spent?
Oh, definitely. Very well spent, yes. Worth every penny.
How was the flight for you, Mike?
Well, the flight went very well indeed. I think the greatest part I enjoyed was the fast acceleration on takeoff. I don't know what the G-force was, but when we were accelerating off, we felt ourselves being pushed back into the back of the seat, and that was an immense, marvellous feeling.
It must bring back some happy memories of Filton for you.
Some happy memories of Filton, to sit in an aircraft which we had researched for many, many years ago. Very nice indeed, and it's a very proud day for us to be here today to celebrate with the rest of Bristol people.
Well, thank you both very much, and a very happy retirement to you. Now, of course, all the passengers on board here have had first-class treatment all day, due in part to the cabin staff who look after them.
My name is Estelle. I'm a Concorde stewardess for British Airways. I've been on the fleet since November. I've got an identical twin sister, and we fly 2 or 3 times a month together. We started flying over in '76 we're still at school, and we thought that is the aircraft we want to fly on, and passengers think it's wonderful. They just, you know, they think that there's one person on them, how can we work so quickly?
I'm Andy Bennison, I'm the red cap, basically I'm the coordinator around the aircraft. So every communication has to come through me so we can actually arrive at a scheduled departure. Basically to bring everything together, coordinate all the different departments from loading, security, cabin crew, check-in on that side. At the moment we're about 30 passengers down. The problem is it's raining outside. Also there's supposed to be an accident on one of the motorways, so we're anticipating some passengers turning up late. Obviously these are our premier passengers coming on this flight and they're paying a lot of money, so we try and do everything we possibly can to help.
Well, earlier this week it was revealed that hairline cracks have been discovered in the wings of 7 British Airways Concordes. It again focuses attention on the aircraft's future and raises questions about whether there will ever be a second generation of supersonic airliners.
A small design team at British Aerospace in Filton is working with France and Germany on a new version of the aircraft for the next century. But it's only a paper plane. Putting it in the air would cost billions. If that investment ever comes, they'd have to design away the old flaws. The plane would be much bigger, 250 seats instead of 100. It would have to be affordable, with tourist-class tickets just 15% more than a conventional aircraft. Noise levels and other environmental concerns like ozone damage would have to be addressed, and range would have to be almost doubled to 5,500 miles.
The speeds involved are simply extraordinary. The existing Concorde travels at over 1,300 miles an hour. And that's quicker than this bullet. The new Concorde would be faster, 400 miles an hour quicker, in fact. Now, there's not enough money in this country to develop a new Concorde, but ironically, one old rival is very keen to do so.
A replacement may be draped in the stars and stripes. It's the US which put up so much resistance to Concorde, which is investing heavily in a new one, to the dismay of the team at Filton.
They believe that the industry, the national industry that leads the way in supersonics will dominate commercial aerospace for the next 50 years.
Beyond Concorde still, the space plane. American and British scientists foresee an aircraft which can travel half the world in 45 minutes. But the expense of all these projects is vast, and it may be that only worldwide cooperation will make them happen. David Garmston, BBC News West.
Well, with me now is Robert Whitfield, the Business Development Director at Filton. The site can never again employ the kind of numbers that, for instance, were building Concorde. But how are you going to ensure a future for the workers that you have now?
Well, we're taking a lot of steps in different areas. One of the most immediate we're taking is to try to secure aircraft servicing work here to fill the main hangars where Concorde was built.
But you need to make sure that you have an airfield here that you can bring the aircraft into, don't you?
Absolutely. We need to have that airfield, and we need to get as much business going through that airfield to be able to support it and have it available for that aircraft servicing. So that's why we're promoting very much the use of Filton as a commercial airport.
If British Aerospace decides to close one of its sites, which is quite likely, what are you doing to make sure that Bristol will not be the one chosen?
Well, of the different British Aerospace sites, the unique feature that we have here is the runways, the size of the runway, and is also the Brabazon hangars, which are unique in terms of their size, and they lend themselves very much to aircraft maintenance. So that is what is a business we're trying to fight and put forward.
Will there ever again be really major aircraft manufacture here?
There is unlikely to be the assembly and delivery of large aircraft, but there is very substantial aircraft manufacture in terms of components here in our aerostructures factories, and that will continue, and we're doing everything we can to ensure that it does.
Robert Whitfield, thank you very much indeed. Annie.
Now, flying on Concorde isn't cheap. No, it normally costs £5,284 for a return to New York. That compares with just under £4,000 for the first-class fare on a 747 and just over £800 for an economy seat. So anyone who flies a Concorde regularly must be a VIP, a very important passenger.
I work for British Petroleum and I run BP's American company. British Airways and this Concorde in particular have been carrying me back and forth to London every week for the last 3 years. Speed is what it's all about for me, the ability to avoid these overnight flights, get to the other end fresh, so that when I'm doing it every week, I truly can just regard it as commuting to work. It doesn't sound like a trip, it doesn't feel like a trip, and that's what this great plane does.
It's things like special requests we have problems with. People come actually when they check in sometimes, which is quite late, and say, you know, I'd like an hamburger. I mean, we have actually gone to places to get an hamburger really late because that's what the customer wants. I mean, if you're paying this sort of money and flying on a plane like this, if the guy wants an hamburger, we give him a hamburger.
It's time to say goodnight. On this historic day for Concorde and for Bristol, we leave you with pictures of the birthday aircraft. From News West, a very good night.
Good night.